Hey Rick, hey Steven, welcome to Vivid Virtual Days.
Morning,
Hey,
Joe.
Joe. Hi,
Morning.
Steven. Good morning to you both.
Morning,
Awesome.
Rick.
So great session. We already have some questions coming in. I'm just curious to know when I listen back to these sessions, sometimes something really grabs me. Rick, something you said was around. You said a bunch of things. One of them was talent wars. So I'd like to ask both of you, what skills you think folks need going into 2020, since you probably see a lot of customers, a lot of enterprises, what their skill sets may be lacking in. What do you see opportunities for people watching this now that they can maybe hone in on for 2020 to help them be more employable?
Yeah, Joe, great. Hey, I'd be happy to start out. And first,
Sure.
let me say it's a pleasure to be here. My voice is back. When I listened to a little bit of that recording that took place, I had just come back from a few weeks of travel overseas, and I had little to no voice left. So I hope you can hear me much better right now. But it
Sounds
is a
good.
pleasure to be here with you both. And at this Micro Focus event, a key partner of DXC's. From a talent perspective, yeah, there's a significant talent war that's out there. I think all companies, certainly our customers, all companies are struggling with that. The items that we look at for the continuous kind of talent progression and improvements for our own work staff and workforce. Certainly anything around agile methods. I think for individuals, the focus around key certifications from a safe perspective, Scrum experience sets. Um, I'd say hands-on experimentation. Nothing can replace that. A focus on getting out there and working on real projects that are focused on agile methods. It's all about working in teams and in team behaviors and honing those particular skills and such. The other area that I would mention in addition to that is security. There's a heavy focus on security, and today's security isn't what it had been from decades ago. Security, I believe, today is heavily about the applications layer, and it is very much so akin to testing, right? It has to do with understanding vulnerabilities that can be introduced as we're trying to deliver on faster and faster cycles, okay, of software with quality. And so a heavy focus around application security, data security, and security across that life cycle with agile methods and agile experiences, I think are two areas that we heavily focus on. And then through very hands-on practical work experiences. Stephen, I'm sure you've got a strong perspective on this as well.
I do, and it's very much what Rick just mentioned. It's because we're focused as an organization around testing and how customers actually test their products. We're working primarily with the testing teams, and what we've seen is a huge shift from the testing teams being, their own silo to becoming part of the development organization. And so the challenge for a lot of those folks is if they don't have that development background, how do they do that? How do they become effective in that world? The good thing is the tools that are out there, the processes that are out there in terms of methodologies, in terms of things like SAFe, allow them to do a better job of that than a lot of those folks originally thought. So with many of our customers, those that have a deep tradition using waterfall within their organizations, those folks have had more success than they expected moving into that sort of model where are working in lockstep with the developers doing testing activities, but having those testing activities become part of sort of a daily routine, part of integrated with the actual development versus something that happens after development is done.
Awesome.
Hey, Joe, if I can expand one other point,
Absolutely.
you had asked about a little bit on the what, what particular skills and in focus areas. I think sometimes just as importantly is the how.
Mhm.
So because there is a talent shortage out there, because there is such high demand, one of the things, and I think we probably all, in some way, shape, or forms, right, we're recruiting from universities, and there's a lot of competition for that talent. I think one of the important things as well is to go as upstream as possible as one can do. And so what I would encourage those that have a number of years of experience, in the workforce, those that are kind of the seniors that are out there, get heavily involved with your local universities. Go upstream. impact and shape curriculum, get to know, the key talent that happens to be there, work with specific professors at those universities. It's a much better approach to collaborating and identifying that talent early on, and in essence, shaping that talent for your workforce needs, rather than just showing up and backing the bus up in order to try and recruit. So that would be the other thing that I would say about going upstream in order to partner with the universities. We find that our customers are just as supportive and find that to be just as important when they see the work that we're doing with universities to shape curriculums.
That's a great point. A lot of times people miss the obvious, but definitely working with the local universities, I think, is a huge win for folks. So, Rick, you did mention security. I've been hearing a lot of folks, for some reason, the last half of 2019 on my podcast talking more and more about security. I've been aware of security. It's been on a backlog, so definition of done for a while. Just curious to know, Stephen, is this something you've been hearing as well? Is this something your company deals with or helps companies with their transformations, helping them with their security efforts also?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at my organization, we're a relatively small organization that focuses once again on testing. I would say about 60% of our business is on the traditional testing of applications, and the remaining 40% is on security testing for those applications. If you looked at those numbers just 1 or 2 years ago, it would have been more skewed towards an 80-20 type percentage. So we're seeing a lot of that. We're still seeing a lot of siloed perspective on security testing versus application testing. So we're trying to help our customers understand the benefits of bringing that all together and integrating that throughout their SDLC with something like DevSecOps, which Rick was talking about in detail in his keynote. But yeah, absolutely, it's something that all of our customers need. Everybody knows about it. It's a much more popular dialogue these days than traditional application testing. However, we're still working very hard with our customers to make sure that they view that as something that should be integrated across that lifecycle.
Stephen, I think that's really, there's a key word that you just mentioned about integrated right across that life cycle, because historically it's usually been a particular gate, or it's been a checkpoint. I spent half my career in the public sector space. Security and highly regulated industries has been critical for years. Having that integrated across the software development life cycle, we found is key, and doing as much of a shift left approach to try and address security earlier in the life cycle, even as early in the requirements, in the architecture, because as Stephen had mentioned, in a traditional testing landscape, if we think about security and the vulnerabilities as just additional defects potentially, as those defects potentially live on further downstream, and if they were to go into production, the cost, the time, and the effort in order to alleviate and address those vulnerabilities only become more costly and more time consuming, and the risks open up much greater within there. So as much as one can bring that earlier on into, say, the integrated life cycle, we find is key. And so looking at static application security testing, SAST, early on, and then even earlier to that from a requirement standpoint. The great thing is, all of our favorite fan, Micro Focus, they've got a world-class security engine in the form of Fortify. And the capabilities we found within Fortify are extensional. And so we've integrated that into how we ourselves deliver and perform services for our customers. And then often we'll inject that into the continuous life cycle, so that security is looked at as an integrated part, Stephen, as you said, rather than either a bolt-on or a checkpoint along the way.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of common themes with DevOps, right? So the shift left, the integration, the removal of silos certainly applies to the security world. And those organizations that are able to start with that approach, with that perspective, and really focus on populating those different parts of their SDLC with those different things like security, those are the ones that are really able to get off the ground quicker and get some real momentum with their DevOps transformations.
So another interesting thing, I'm being selfish asking you these questions, but I'll get into the users' questions. But I just want to get to this really quick, and then I'll get to the questions from the audience. The next thing, you both mentioned lean and safe, or one of you mentioned lean, the other mentioned safe. At the enterprise level, do you see folks struggling with agile and using an approach maybe like lean or safe helps them get their SDLC more, all these different parts, security, actually part of their software lifecycle?
I'm happy to go ahead and maybe throw a first thought or two
Sure.
out there. There's a number of different methods and approaches. I think what becomes a critical success factors is teams coming together and working off of a common playbook and working in short increments. So there's a number of techniques or approaches in that, but one could assemble the best individual performers in the world. Think of your favorite sports team, and I can think of a few in which tremendous amounts of money were spent on high individual performers, and the team just never produced the end results, never got to the playoffs the way that they expected to. Really what it comes down to is teams working off of, or individuals working as teams and working off of a common playbook. I think the key there is then doing small chunk, iterative, demonstrable type of approaches to this, and in doing through the creation of very small chunks of tangible software. I can think of tremendously over the course of my career, so many projects that have gone askew at times because there's been drift between the understanding of requirements and how that gets embodied into working software. So whatever method or approach that one takes in an agile execution or in an agile construct, it really is about short increments and creation of working software, and then going through retrospectives along the way to understand what worked, what didn't work, what can improve software performance, throughput, user productivity, team productivity, really at the end of the day, for those to be working as teams. So we found that agile methods has been a great way in order to improve the outcome to what the original intent of the product owners and the business owners had envisioned to be embodied through software.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Steven?
I would agree with that. We see that, and we hear that from our customers quite a bit. These small incremental changes, and it's a constant learning process. These are folks that are now working in ways that they've never worked before, and getting into it. We do hear a lot of concern from teams when they're first starting down this path of how do we go ahead and quote unquote transform. One of the most interesting things that I've seen is when organizations start this idea, this concept of a transformation through essentially internal dialogue. And there are actually companies out there that focus just on that. They focus on helping organizations keep people in a room just to talk before they start doing anything, before they start talking lean or they talk safe, or they're just getting people into a room to talk about what are the challenges that we are seeing and that maybe we haven't communicated well enough because we are in silos. We're not talking, typically on a day-to-day basis. Let's just get those folks in the room and start talking. And what's interesting is when you get the right people in the room and you help elicit that feedback, magic happens. The customer starts figuring things out themselves. And these organizations, we're not one of them, unfortunately. It would be great to have that skill set, but these organizations that are experts at getting these folks into a room, they're really good at eliciting the relevant discussion points. And what ends up happening is a lot of stuff gets done in a very short period of time. And so, kind of what Rick was saying, lots of different methodologies out there, lots of ways to do it. And I was touching on this in my keynote as well. Every organization is different, and there are quote unquote blueprints out there, but there really isn't a cookbook for DevOps yet. And I don't think there's going to be one in the near future just because every organization is so varied. But as organizations really start to listen to those key stakeholders and have them start talking to each other, they figure it out. It's a big part of it is getting them together and really focusing on solving problems versus, hey, here's a methodology or an approach or a product or something that we've heard is successful with DevOps.
I'm looking forward to partnering with Steven because I think he and I see eye to eye pretty heavily on this. We're not talking about tools right now.
Yep. And
it really is about breaking down silos. It is about good communication. And one of the first critical success factor, Joe and colleagues that I'd shared, was about knowing what you're trying to solve for. Mm-hmm. And so DevOps is often about software performance throughput, in doing so, right, at a faster pace, but with quality. And so as we're trying to ratchet up those speeds, okay, or if there's challenges, right, that the customers are having, it's understanding what those initial constraints and those bottlenecks are. And it is then solving in a layered, methodical approach against what those problems are. And critical to that is striking a baseline, okay, measure, because you've got to be able to show the gains and understand and learn. I think Stephen and I both talked about continuous learning. And so some things that one unfolds may not have the full impact that we might have been expecting. So measuring and learning from the improvements that one is unfolding for continuous improvement along the way. There's a lot of sense and respond that's here. It's also about teams and people coming together, as Stephen had said. Good communications, good collaboration, and good teamwork. Okay, so there's constant fine-tuning on the way as one is improving their execution, their software delivery life cycles with methods, with the right people, processes, and with the tooling and such, in order for that all to come together.
Awesome. So just curious to know, you mentioned continuous learning and measuring. I think a lot of companies, maybe just me, experience what they call as DevOps Envy, where they look at like a Google or a Facebook and they try to emulate that rather than measure their process, and because their process is probably a lot different than these other companies. Is that something you see people focusing maybe on what other people are doing with DevOps rather than measuring and getting better and iterating on the feedback loops that they're creating within their own companies?
I think there is it is very common for organizations to start talking when they talk about DevOps and where they want to get to. They mention companies like Facebook, like Twitter, like Zappos. I just had a conversation yesterday with a customer who wants to become the next Zappos, right? The first thing to share in when you're having that discussion, or the first thing we share, is, look, those are organizations that they don't have legacy, right? They started from the beginning in a quote unquote DevOps world. So they were building from the outset with this model in mind. Secondly, the things that are valuable to those Facebooks and those types of organizations, those aren't necessarily going to bring you as a different company value. What's important is to be able to leverage not just a new approach to doing things, but to be able to leverage the assets and the resources that you have, and that's your culture, that's your people, and it's your products. You can't simply get rid of all those things and replace it with something new, right? So when you start thinking about that, when a customer starts to look at it from that perspective, that's when they're really starting to think, okay, what really is important for me, and how do I want to transform, or more importantly, what are the things that I'm trying to get to, and then how do I transform to get to that? So it kind of takes that conversation away and the fear of, hey, we're never going to be a Facebook, and helps them understand, look, that's not necessarily what you need or want to do. There's other ways to get to where you need to be and add value without having to completely change and become that type of organization.
Awesome. Rick, anything to share around that, or should I get to the first question?
Well, I think, every if there's a consistency here, it's that we see with each of our clients, and even in our own environments, each problem in each customer, has their own set of challenges that they're trying to work through, their bottlenecks, their obstacles. So focusing initially on, is that a latency issue? Is it a defect quality issue? Is it that I can't get releases out fast enough to keep up with the expectations that the business has on the new requirements and new services and new, capabilities that they want delivered even faster? So first, initially focusing in on, what it is you're trying to solve for, and don't try and solve for, a full stack of items. Focus in on that first item that's the most painful and attack that. Okay, measure that and look at the improvements that are made there, and then move on to the next chunk and the next chunk. Because what you may have thought in a general roadmap, you may find yourself deviating as you get and solve certain problems and you move forward. And then you start getting a bit of a rhythm going. Your team's working more and more together collaboratively. Productivity is starting to increase. You can then start to introduce greater automation, along the life cycle, moving then possibly from more of, say, a current life cycle method and maybe waterfall to shorter cycles and shorter sprints, more demonstrable software chunks along the way, and such. But each and every, client's problems and challenges and environments, tend to be a bit unique. And so you've got to solve for those. And so it starts with good listening and good collaboration and bringing people together.
Great stuff. All right, let's get to our first questions from Carlos. And Carlos wants to know, based on the DXC activities around the world, what is your opinion about the increased usage of the testing automation AI tools? What DXC is suggesting to clients and customers in South America about it?
Okay, great. Hey, Carlos, thank you so much for your question and participating here today. Test automation, I think, is one of the key items when we look at an overall life cycle and some of the early stage value that can be delivered in DevOps types of constructs, or more generally speaking, just improving software performance throughput. We absolutely see test automation services as being a foundational element that aids many of our customers. In increasing and improving test automation through intelligence along the way, and the gains and the insights that we have through a body of knowledge on patterns, and repeated aspects in various test scripting and approaches to automate, we find is key. So what I'd say is, anything that one is doing on a repeated basis, manually, automate that as often as possible. We see high value from a test automation perspective. We focus heavily on micro focus in a suite of testing tools and solutions. Test automation and AI is critical to early stage life cycle movements when we go from kind of a 1.0 and the testing kind of environment of heavy manual, 2.0, 3.0, and so on, as we're going from greater consistency in how teams operate, greater levels then of tooling consistency, and then increased automation and intelligence and data-driven then activities that go along with it. Is all about that progression and such. In addition to, I'm sure, the insights that Stephen has as a professional kind of testing expert and having a history on that. Roger Smith is going to be joining in just a little bit later on this morning. He's our global product manager for both application security and testing services at DXC. And so I hope you'll stick around to hear from some of the details that he'll have to share as well, Carlos.
Stephen?
Yeah, and kind of going to what Rick was just saying, when it comes to test automation, the challenge has always been, first, what do we need to test? What are the things that we need to automate? Because there's a significant level of effort to build that automation. And secondly, how do we maintain that going forward because of all the effort that we put in there? And those have been the two kind of things that have defined tools over the decades in terms of their strengths and weaknesses. I think AI is adding to that significantly. So any sort of thing that is going to help you determine what, help narrow that set of tests down to that set that's relevant for your organization is going to be critical. AI is going to help that. Yesterday in the micro focus sessions with product management, they were talking quite a bit about the new capabilities in UFT to allow that. And secondly, the ability, if AI can help from a maintenance perspective, with keeping that test set relevant for you, that's going to allow you to include that automation for a longer period of time going forward, without having to take your resources away from the other DevOps agile activities that they're performing now, to just work on script maintenance. So I do see AI as being big, and it's not just in test automation. If you look at, we're talking Micro Focus product tools today, there's a lot of talk and discussion about how AI is going to become part of the broader testing tool set. We're really excited to see what's going to happen over the next few years, because AI is going to be a big part of that.
Awesome. All right, next question. How can one fund their digital transformation journey to agile DevOps? I'm sure you guys get asked this often. Stephen?
Yeah,
Yes, Rick, go ahead.
Stephen, please go right ahead.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, because we're more focused on kind of the testing activities versus more the end-to-end transformation, I feel, Rick, you may be better for this. I'm happy to chime in, but
Sure.
Rick, I actually really want to hear what you have to, what you experienced.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is a question that that clients pose to us to try and understand what we're seeing with the many customers that we support in different geographies and different industries. There's lots of goals and interests that customers have, but often a lot of modernization doesn't even commence or kick off because of funding issues. And so it's a matter of how can one, free up and release funds in order to kind of fund and fuel transformation and modernization activities. So what I'd say is one of the foundational aspects is, and we've already talked about this, first of all, one has to strike a baseline and understand whether it's from a financial perspective, whether it's from a software performance throughput perspective, measure. Strike your baseline, understand where you're at. Okay. When we look at optimization approaches, first, one could be looking at where is there heavy manual activity. We were just talking about test automation. Okay. If one is able to introduce rich process automation into what has been a pretty manual set of steps and approaches and such, in those particular cases, we're generally then being able to free individuals up, talent up, and spend up to be able to focus on then the creation of new services and new capabilities. So there's generally what we're looking at are incremental gains. It's not a big bang approach, it's incremental gains. And in each of those cases, as one can drive greater automation across, one can drive greater throughput across, one can, get releases out there faster and such. In each of those cases, we're getting incremental gains. So I think it's important to go through early stage value stream mapping as one of the first items. And essentially, it's what Stephen was talking about. It's getting individuals in a room that are exhibiting the problems, that are going through the pain points and such, better understanding what those pains are, and starting to then plan out a course and a roadmap for alleviating those, and at least a trajectory on what the future state would look like. Okay, and then it is introducing different techniques and approaches along the way in order to drive the data-driven, intelligent-based, lean approaches with automation in order to take what may be, take incident management, okay, kind of in the runtime operations. As much automation that can be introduced in order to auto-detect problems, in order to auto-resolve problems, the introduction of bots, okay, in order to address those items. We actually have in our operations more bots that are running than we do actually, human professionals that are critical to the overall equation, but addressing kind of the auto-detect and auto-correct even before incidents, flare up. And could cause issue. Those are being addressed. Each of those automations and those improvements then go to freeing up and releasing dollars. And I think it's important in having an economic model, okay, that one in essence is looking at the savings and the gains that one's making to be able to redirect those savings. So the other part is key is working with an enterprise stakeholder who has enough of that life cycle, okay, so that one is pulling levers to be able to make gains in one area that frees dollars up, that frees human capital capacity up, that frees up compute capacity, and then that can be redirected. And that redirection is then against an incremental modernization plan, okay? And the gains are measured and the value is understood, and it's that kind of a balancing act along the way. So that's common the approaches that we see with many customers.
Awesome. So Stephen,
and Rick, I'm going to need to get on your calendar because you're obviously an expert in this, and I really want to. I personally want to get to know more about how organizations do fund that, because we do have that conversation with our customers. One small thing I'll add to what Rick was saying was that when we see customers take that approach of the quote unquote get everybody into a room, those tend to be things that are promoted by the higher levels in the organization. They know that they want to get somewhere and they want to become more effective as an organization, but they're not the ones that solve that problem. They don't know how to do that. It's really a model where it's promoted from up on high. The folks lower in the organization get together, and they're really the ones that come up with the novel ideas, and they figure out the things that they can do if they go ahead and start making changes, and then that bubbles up. And where that's important from a funding perspective is it's giving them a new set of conversation points to promote these activities to the organization, and it allows them to tie those to those specific metrics that Rick was talking about. So I'm not saying customers have money and it's just a matter of taking it from one spot to the other, but that's kind of how it is, right? The funds for a lot of organizations, they're either there or they can be attained. It's just a matter of giving those projects the priority and the emphasis so that they can get that broader budget that's going to support at least the initial stages of the DevOps transformation until it kind of starts becoming a well-oiled machine.
Yep.
The other aspects, the kind of people and process aspects, if one looks across a given enterprise, there may be multiple groups that are doing testing, as an example, slightly different ways in that enterprise. So looking at it from an enterprise perspective as well to try and drive consistency, commonality of tooling, driving as much as a service consumption. We offer testing as a service, a consumption-based model, deliverable-based output, where customers don't have to necessarily then, acquire the hardware, the software, kind of all of those aspects. Application security testing as a service is another one, right? Consumption-based services, consuming for just the levels that one needs, rather than having, big iron and tremendous amount of software, et cetera, et cetera. So sometimes it's just-in-time services and it's consumption-based services that can also help out customers to balance the cost that they have against a given enterprise.
Awesome. No, this has been a great session. Time has really flown by. We're actually out of time. But before we go, any last minute words of wisdom you want to leave the Vivit Virtual Days attendees? Stephen?
Words of wisdom, I would say the take advantage of today, take advantage of the opportunity to hear other customers talk about what they've been able to achieve and how they got there. I think if you were to try to find out what's the best way for you to, as an organization, to transform, it's really about understanding how other organizations have worked on specific or similar things, and getting their take on it, what's worked for them and what hasn't. So this is it's a great opportunity today. The other thing is, I would suggest looking into, I mentioned in my keynote, this DevOps Enterprise Summit, really interesting event, because it wasn't a vendor show, it wasn't a how-to show, it was really just, hey, let's get everybody into a room, let's have coffee, let's sit down, let's talk about what's worked. I think there's some really powerful stories out there, and I'm excited to hear the ones that are going to be presented today.
Awesome. Rick, final words of wisdom?
Yeah, and so maybe I'll just work off of what Stephen said, because he said, get out there and understand what's working, what's not. That kind of goes to a word of experimentation. Okay, so explore, experiment, try things. Okay, and then measure, because no one is going to tell your story better than you will. So you want to understand what's the current performance levels today. How are we operating as an enterprise? So have that baseline, even if it's in a small chunk. Okay, experiment and unfold change. Okay, your learnings, what you're hearing and seeing in other places that's working, and try that out in your environments. And if you see the gains, okay, report on those gains, tell that story, and then scale, right? Take it small and then increment it larger and scale it out. But experiment and go have fun.
Awesome. I don't know if the two of you have ever met before, but this was a great pairing, so I really enjoyed it. So thank you so much. It was almost rehearsed, and it wasn't. So thank you, Rick and Stephen, for your time. Really appreciate it.
Hey, Joe, thank you so much.
Awesome. Cheers.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Thank you.